So again, welcome to CCL's Thursday Night Live training. I'm going to drop the link for you to log your training in the chat. If you haven't had a chance to do so, make sure you're logged into community, and then you can just click that link. I'll drop it in a couple more times tonight as we go along. We'll get started here in just a second. If you still haven't had an opportunity, please tell us where you're joining from in the chat. And also, I have a link for tonight's slides. If you want to follow along, there are some studies that are referenced in there. I'll try to drop those in the chat as quickly as Danny moves through them, but I'm sure he'll be getting ahead of me on some of that. All right, so presenting tonight is Dr. Danny Richter. Danny served as CCL's longtime Vice President of Government Affairs and currently serves CCL as a policy fellow. He has led thousands of volunteers through the ins and outs of effective congressional engagement and has been instrumental in shaping legislative strategy across multiple administrations. So Danny combines deep policy expertise with a gift for translating complex political issues into practical, empowering guidance for our volunteers. And we are thrilled to have him walk us through the Foreign Pollution Fee Act. And Danny, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ricky, and hello, everybody. It's good to see you. In our time together, I have three learning goals for you. The first learning goal is I hope that you'll finish this presentation and understand the bill's goals and how it tries to accomplish them. I hope you'll be able to place the bill in the context of recent events, and I hope you'll understand why CCL is supporting it. I hope to achieve these goals with this outline. I'll first cover what the bill does, what has changed from the previous iteration. This is the second time this bill has been introduced. I'll try to put it into some context, and then I'll talk a little bit more in detail about CCL's support, and then I'll pull out what I think are the main conclusions, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A and discussion. But before I dive into that, I do want to just hit this point, which is the reasons why CCL is supporting this. It is likely to reduce emissions. It builds bipartisan support. It needs our help to pass, and it is consistent with previous positions and builds on the foundation that CCL has established on CBAMs, CBAM being carbon border adjustment mechanisms. So these are the reasons why CCL is supporting the Foreign Pollution Fee Act. So what does the Foreign Pollution Fee Act do? Well, it's got four main parts that I'm going to talk about, four main goals, really. It creates a really aggressive tariff on carbon emissions. It takes an aggressive stance on non-market economies and foreign entities of concern. It is very clearly aimed at coordination with other countries to try and achieve a global coordinated response to climate. And it would lead to and it calls for a detailed carbon accounting infrastructure. And it's really kind of remarkable the level at which the level of detail it is calling for. And I'll talk about all of these points. Let's begin with the carbon tariff. It is a performance standard, meaning that there is no payment for emissions below the baseline. And the baseline is the average US performance on emissions plus 10%. So if you are a country and you are 9% emitting 9% more than the US baseline, you don't pay any tariff. The reason for that 10% cushion is really, I think, international trade rules. It's difficult to determine equivalence. So that gives a little bit of grace, a little grace room for other countries. But just to reiterate, there's no payment for goods and the emissions of those goods below 110% of the US baseline. Another really interesting thing about this bill is it goes after scopes 1, 2, and 3. And this is, to me, I found this very surprising because a lot of people I've talked to over the years have really said that scope 3 emissions are too hard to go after. And this figure on the right kind of illustrates what scope 1, 2, and 3 cover. Scope 1 is this green arrow in the middle. It covers the company facilities and the company vehicles, so the emissions produced there. Scope 2 is just this gray area, and all that is purchased electricity, steam, heating, cooling for own use. So that's really it, scope 1 and 2. Scope 3 is everything else. So it's the transportation and distribution, it's the emissions in purchased goods and services. And so it's really difficult to account for, but the Foreign Pollution Fee Act would be going after those. And I'll say this again later, but it also goes after all of these emissions here. So this is actually a change from the first version. It's not just going after carbon dioxide equivalent, it's going after methane, NOx, hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, and sulfur hexafluoride. So I think that's pretty remarkable. The carbon tariff rate, um, it divides goods into three tiers. Uh, Tier one is a 5 to 25% tariff for a pollution intensity difference, which I've abbreviated PID here, of 10 to 20%. So that's 10 to 20% above the US baseline. So you take the pollution intensity of the good from the foreign country, you subtract the US baseline, and if that result is between 10 and 20%, then you get a tariff scale between 5 and 25%. Tier two is for a pollution intensity difference of 20 to 200%, and they get a tariff rate of 25 to 80%. And tier three is for a pollution intensity difference greater than 200%. So you subtract the US uh, pollution intensity and you have a remainder of over 200%, and they have a tariff rate of between 80 and 100%. And this graph on the left, this was produced by Dana Nucitelli, and this is our estimation of how that might actually look. So that's the variable charge on the y-axis, the pollution intensity difference here on the x-axis. So that's what it is. The carbon tariff is ad valorem. This is a common term in trade, a little bit of Latin. It just means it's proportionate to the value of the product. And you might at first be thinking, well, that's silly. I want it based on the, carbon atoms. It should be based on the carbon atoms. But when you do it this way, ad valorem, you're really talking about a carbon price, an effective carbon price of those emissions of anywhere from $50 per ton of CO2 to in excess of $1,000 per ton of CO2 equivalent. And to illustrate this, I've included a figure. This is from a report that was released by the Silverado Policy Accelerator in February. It was looking at aluminum in particular, and this chart really made it pop for me. The using relative difference can and the ad valorem rate can really make a huge difference, translating to really aggressive uh, rates of carbon fee. And so what this chart shows is you have the per ton equivalents in green here. So $55 per megaton of carbon dioxide equivalent, $110 per megaton of carbon dioxide equivalent for various types of steel and aluminum. And the bars you can see are just not as big, not even close to how big they become for relative difference. And the paper said explicitly that this zero point 0.6 and zero point 0.9 was based on the last iteration of the Foreign Pollution Fee Act. And so this really made it pop for me. When you do this ad valorem calculation, you get these really, really large rates of carbon fees. It does allow for a reduction in the tariff for CCS, that's carbon capture and sequestration, carbon dioxide removal, that's CDR, and offsets. It also scales the rebate for the offsets to the durability of the storage, which I thought was really interesting. So if it's not going to be stored for as long, then you don't get as much of a rebate. Reading this language, it was very clear to me that they leveled up and they talked to some people who have been thinking about carbon dioxide removal, carbon capture and sequestration, and offsets in a very, very sophisticated way. So this is really interesting language and I think a real evolution on that point in legislation. It also calls for really aggressive enforcement. And I would go so far as to say so here's one example. This is it being punitive for evasion or fraud. And here, just this underlying point. The secretary may prohibit the importation of covered goods from that country or product by that producer. And if you go a little bit higher in the text, the producer who, country or producer is evading or attempting to evade application of the fee. So this is an embargo. So this language says if you are evading the payment of this tariff, then you can't export to the United States, period. So that is aggressive enforcement. Uh, Here's the list of products covered: aluminum, cement, iron and steel, fertilizer, which was not covered in the earlier version, glass, hydrogen, solar products, and battery products. And then this figure is also from that Silverado Policy Accelerator report. And what this figure brought home to me was just the complexity. I mean, I said aluminum, but what this breaks down is just all the different ways that you can have aluminum imported into the United States. So aluminum extrusions are classified in 7604. That's referring to the HTS, or Harmonized Trade Tariff Schedule, and 8608 or 7608, which is tubes and pipes. And then you go down here, aluminum window frames are classified as window frames in 7610.10. And I'm giving this as an example to just show, I said that this would really call for a high level of development in terms of assigning carbon intensity to certain goods. And I think that this really illustrates the level of detail that is called for in a way that really made it pop for me. There is also an aggressive geopolitical stance. So if you are a non-market economy and you're exporting to the United States, you are assigned whatever your tariff rate would be, it's multiplied by two. If you are a foreign entity of concern, and there's a definition in the bill, same thing. Whatever the tariff rate would be based on the carbon intensity of that good, you multiply by two. If you are a facility owned by a foreign entity of concern in a non-market economy, whatever the tariff rate would otherwise be based on the carbon intensity is multiplied by four. So the max tariff rate is 400%. And this is an embargo. It's basically saying that if you have goods that are taxed at that rate, they're not coming into this country. You're not exporting to this country. It's also very clear that coordination is central to the goals of the bill. There's a section on international partnership agreements on the basis of one or more covered products. So it doesn't have to be across the whole suite of products covered. It could just be one, it can be more. This is only possible with market economies. So again, here you have some pretty strong geopolitical posturing. Uh, and I found this to be a really strong contrast in the leniency it provides to these countries compared to the earlier sections which I showed you. So, for example, in the case of a country in which the United States has a free trade agreement in effect, is negotiating for a partnership agreement under this title, the application of the fee under Section 4696 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986, as added by Title 1, may be delayed for not more than 12 months to provide time to complete the negotiations. So earlier I told you about how if there's an evasion of the fee, embargo, you can just block the importation of that. Here they're saying we can delay the fee for up to a year as long as we're negotiating. That contrast, I think, really underlines how much they're relying on coordination to get the emissions reductions in this bill. I'll also note that they include in this section support for low and lower middle income countries. So instead of having 12 months, they have 3 years and 5 years respectively, which is good for international trade law considerations. As I said, this builds a carbon accounting infrastructure, and the way they're trying to accomplish this is with the Advisory Committee on Global Pollution Challenges. This committee would be composed of two representatives from each of the covered sectors, two representatives from the national labs, and two researchers with expertise in this subject area. And what this committee would do the purpose would be to advise on methods of calculating both the baseline, that is the US pollution intensity, as well as the pollution intensity for covered products from other countries. So this advisory committee would figure out all those scope one, scope two, scope three emissions. They're not for all the countries and all the products. So it would be a challenging job. Now, what has changed from the previous iteration? I made a pretty quick summary here. This one's a lot shorter. It's 63 pages as opposed to 92 pages for the 2023 version. The 2023 version included a lot more products, and I've listed them here. The 2025 version accounts for direct air capture and removal. It also specifically mentions seawater. So again, that's evidence that they've really talked to some people who've thought deeply about carbon dioxide removal, which is interesting. This includes stronger penalties for non-compliance, and it includes other greenhouse gases, as I mentioned before. So those hydrofluorocarbons, the methane, nitrous oxide, sulfur hexafluoride, and the perfluorocarbons. Now, I think it's important to put this into context. And so I'm going to begin by talking about some recent history, a brief timeline. In 2022, Republicans were actually pitching Democrats on a carbon border tariff. And this, for those of you who are paying attention, then this was in the context of the Inflation Reduction Act. It was before it had passed. It was when it was still better known as Build Back Better. Senator Manchin was convening a last-ditch group of Republicans and Democrats in the Senate to try and work out a deal. And in the context of those talks, you had news of Republicans saying, hey, why don't you include a carbon border tariff in this big bill? And so that was really the first that I heard of Republicans pitching Democrats, of being interested in this idea. And they're actually trying to sell Democrats, which I thought was fascinating. Senator Cassidy was one of those Republicans, and he first introduced the earlier version of the Foreign Pollution Fee Act in 2023. In 2024, you have Senators Whitehouse and Cassidy, and in the picture, Senator Cassidy is on the left, Senator Whitehouse is on the right. But Senators Whitehouse and Cassidy made a series of public appearances together, making the joint case for their different bills. And this has always been really interesting to watch. I've seen them present a few times, tag teaming, and it's pretty clear that Senator Cassidy doesn't want Senator Whitehouse on his bill. It would be problematic for him to have one of the more liberal senators on his bill. Senator Cassidy is facing a primary challenge, and it's really important for him to be able to message this clearly and as a strong Republican. Senator Whitehouse, of course, has his Clean Competition Act, which is also border forward, but does include a domestic charge on carbon pricing. And I think it's really interesting that the uh, the way they show respect for each other and the way they continue to approach this, they clearly have different approaches. They're trying to, I think it's a political move to try and cover all their bases and move this idea forward with their respective bases. And there are a lot of concerns about this bill, the Foreign Pollution Fee Act, but perhaps one of the best reasons to support it is that Senator Whitehouse, who is one of the biggest climate champions on the Hill and arguably the biggest champion of carbon pricing on the Hill, has spoken to CCL a lot. He continues to have these discussions. I don't claim to know as much about how politics will work out as sitting senators. And so I think that the fact that Senator Whitehouse thinks this is a good idea, I think that should make you feel good about CCL's support for this bill as well. In 2024, Senator Cassidy released a simplified version as a discussion draft, and he sought comment. And so that I think was really, really smart. He gained a lot of industry support by doing that. There was really, working with his office and the staff there. They did a really good job of seeing diverse opinions. We provided our thoughts and that you can see support, a lot more support as a result of that, and a simplified bill, which doesn't always happen when you do this. And then in 2025, in April last month, Senator Cassidy reintroduces it. So that's some recent history, a brief timeline. I also think it's really interesting the way that Senator Cassidy himself frames this. And so this is a picture from the Hill. You can see the Climate Leadership Council logo in the background. They hosted the launch event for this. This was after the Liberation Day tariffs, and Senator Cassidy got up there and spoke to the crowd. There was press in the crowd, and he articulated his bill as a way to make elements of Trump's agenda permanent. He pointed out that President Trump, he has these tariffs. There's a good goal for them, and his bill is a way of making sure that they can survive whatever the next president wants to do. And so I thought that was an interesting way. He, as a Republican, has to remain Republican. He needs to be a good soldier within his party, and that was his way of doing that. He also presented the bill as a quadruple win, a win for climate, for trade, for national security, and for economic security. And he gave the example of his co-sponsor, Lindsey Graham, a Republican out of South Carolina. He cares more about the national security benefits of this bill. And so that quadruple win was important for him. He also pointed out that the Louisiana state legislature has unanimously called for a fee on foreign goods. And that's just impressive. There's always a back and forth between federal legislators and their state legislature, but to have gotten unanimous support from your legislature back home for something that a bill that you're going to introduce, that's impressive. So I thought that was quite impressive by the good senator from Louisiana. And the bill, as with last time, explicitly states this is not a carbon tax. Nothing in this bill shall be construed as supporting a carbon tax. And so that's also pretty important for his messaging that this is not perceived as or confused with a carbon tax. Um, a carbon price is still very unlikely. The best argument for this, which I presented in an earlier presentation, I think in November, would be this CBO list. And this is a figure from CBO, that's the Congressional Budget Office. They provided a list of revenue raisers, knowing that Republicans were likely to do reconciliation and extend the Trump tax cuts from 2017. Number 17 is impose a tax on greenhouse gas emissions, and the CBO estimated it could raise 571 to 865 billion dollars. Of course, there are a lot more arguments against a carbon tax in reconciliation. You've seen a tax on the methane fee, specifically, they voted to using the Congressional Review Act to remove the regulations that were a key part of the methane fee. Interestingly, the last I heard, they actually kept the methane fee, but they put it at zero until the 10th year, the 10th scoring year. So that was kind of interesting. I'm not sure how that work in the absence of the regulations, but in any case, that happened. Of course, the House has now passed the reconciliation bill as of today. It doesn't include a carbon price, so that's a pretty strong signal that it will not include that. You also had Republicans balking at President Trump suggesting new taxes. A couple of weeks ago, President Trump said, "Hey, how about we increase the top tax rate for high-income earners?" And Republicans in Congress said, "No, we're not going to do that," and he backed off. And then just Trump's positioning in general on climate and the environment, fossil fuels. Even though on Liberation Day he did riff on uh, how unfair it was that other countries export their pollution to the United States, which I think is a huge shift in the Overton window to help our cause. It's still pretty clear that, and for this bill, it's still pretty clear that he's not going to tolerate a direct price on carbon. Here's the supporter list. You can go through this. I'll leave this up for a moment. Pretty diverse group here. As I said, a strong presence from industry. I'm betting that the Carbon Removal Alliance are the ones who really upped the bill's game in terms of carbon dioxide removal. And finally, we get to the expected emissions and revenue estimates. So far, we have three estimates for how much this would actually raise. Climate Leadership Council estimated 80 to 165 billion over 10 years, but this was not specific to the Foreign Pollution Fee Act. I bet that they had a pretty good idea of what was coming from behind the scenes conversations, but still it came out before this bill. So that's a non-specific estimate. The American Action Forum, Shu-Ting Pomerleau, she came up with an estimate of 133.6 to 185.4 billion dollars raised over 10 years, and she had seen the bill text. And then just yesterday, Resources for the Future, RFF, they estimated a number much lower, 33.3 billion over 10 years, and they had the benefit of the bill. The only one to produce an estimate of emissions reductions was RFF. They estimated 32 million megatons per year in year one. And this is based on modeling that excludes coordination effects. So they are not able to model, what if other countries do form agreements with the United States? They didn't model that. And as I said, that's clearly a big part of what this bill is hoping in terms of the global approach. So those are the emissions, much, much less than you would raise with a domestic carbon price, but not nothing. So CCL support. Again, here are the main points, just a little bit more. CCL is supporting this because it's likely to reduce emissions. While not nearly as much as a domestic carbon price, the infrastructure it creates for counting and measuring carbon embedded in goods going across borders is very important. It builds bipartisan support. Though this is a Republican-only bill, the White House cascading coordination over the past 2 years is very telling. It makes the principle that polluters should pay bipartisan. This bill needs our help to pass. In the supporter list, you really didn't see many other bipartisan other grassroots groups. So there's a gap in grassroots support for this policy, and CCL can play an important role in building support in that way. And it's consistent with previous positions and builds on a foundation we've established with CBAMs. CCL was one of the first organizations to introduce congressional offices to the concept of a border tariff. Of course, we also did that, depending on how you're counting that, we did that with carbon border adjustments, the carbon fee and dividend a long, long time ago. But we've also been on it with this bill in its previous iteration as well. So to conclude, the reintroduced Foreign Pollution Fee Act is a bill CCL supports because it is likely to reduce emissions, builds bipartisan support, needs our help to pass, and builds on our previous positions, particularly related to CBAMs. Again, CBAM is Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. This bill includes an aggressive price on carbon emissions above the US baseline. It is clearly aimed at coordination with other countries where we expect most emissions reductions would come from. And it would help build a detailed carbon accounting infrastructure for products crossing borders down to scope 3 and for more than just CO2.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration.
Like what you hear? Recommend us to your friends and make sure to give us a 5-star rating. It helps us show up on other listeners' feeds. Feel free to pass on any suggestions for future episodes in the comments as well.
And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.